So there are a few different types of clones. Firstly, we have medical clones. Medical clones are the thing that you transport back to when you die. Now, your medical clone has a certain rating, which is how many skill points you'll have when you go back to it. Well, the maximum skill points you'll have when you go back to it. If your medical clone has less skill points than you currently do when you die, you will lose skill points. So make sure that your medical clone is up to date, specifically before fleets or anything where you might get popped. Though it's good practice to keep your medical clone up to date no matter what. Now, your medical clone doesn't require any standing to put it in a station and can be moved without actually being in a station. So you can just select and move your medical clone into anywhere you like. Well, with certain restrictions. Now, jump clones, on the other hand, are a bit different. You can move between these at will. Now, could anyone X up if you have absolutely zero experience with jump clones? Excellent. Okay. So, as I've mentioned, jump clones do require infomorph psychology to use. The more levels that you have, the higher the skill. The more levels in that skill you have, the more jump clones you can create. Now, to actually create a jump clone in the station, that corporation will need to have a standing of 0 or higher. Now, this can either be a personal standing or a corporation standing. Estel Aradar Corp Services, which is a public corporation, standing with most stations in HiSec and a lot in NullSec as well. Eve University has the required standing with 2 corporations, these being the Wycombe Peace Corps and Canada Innovation, which is why when you join the uni, we do ask that you have no standing or 8.0 standing with those corporations. Now, jump clones, basically what they are, is separate copies of you that you can transport to instantaneously. When you jump out of a clone, behind where you were, that you can then jump back into later. It's important to note that if you have implants in your clone, then those implants will stay with the clone when you leave it, which means you can have clean clones or clones with less expensive implants. The exception to this is that blingy, like multiple billion implant that gives you a gold pod instead of a green one, which carries across all clones and is just permanently injected. Interesting. Never had that before. Give me 1 second.
The public server bit is pure speculation, not proven.
Right, so I've killed my housemate's download, so we'll see if that helps. If not, this is also being broadcasted to the public mumble where we don't seem to have any problems. So, would anyone like me to just repeat that whole section? Okay. So, what a jump clone is a separate clone that you can jump to at any point from anywhere, and you can do so instantaneously. This means that what you can do is, for example, have a jump clone in one at the LowSec campus, which you're free to jump between and instantly transport to the other location. However, there is a time down of 24 hours that can be reduced with certain skills. Now, when you jump out of a clone, it's left in the station, so you can then jump back into it later. Implants are left in the clone that you jump out of, which means you can have clones with different sets of implants in them. This is useful if you want to have your +5 learning implants for your clone that sits in a station, and something like +3 implants for the clone that you take out on fleets. The exception to this being the ultra blingy 3 bil plus implant, which carries across all clones. Now, to create a clone in a station, you need to have 8.0 or above standing with the corporation that owns the station, and that station also has to have a medical facility. Now, this can either be personal or corporation standing, which is why Eve University offers such standings with 2 corporations, and there are some public corporations such as Estel Arador or Arabor Corp Services which offer it with many more. I think they're up to something like 2,700 total stations. Now, does anyone have any questions about the mechanics of jump clones that I've covered so far before we continue into what they're really used for and how do we get them? Can you lose jump clones through potting? No, when you die, you go back to your medical clone. And you still have all the same jump clones available to you. However, the clone that you do die in will lose its implants. The rest of your clones, however, will be fine. Right. So, what are jump clones actually useful for? So, as I've mentioned, jump clones allow you to have clean clones, which means that when you die, you don't lose your 1 billion plus set of implants. It also allows you to transport between locations very, very quickly. For example, if you'd like to join the practical for Aldrat today and you're currently down in the Losec campus, the mining campus, that sort of thing, and you have a convenient jump clone at Aldrat, you can transport there instantly. Which is also good if you're, for example, boxed in by war targets being camped in a station. You can just jump away and it doesn't really matter. Now, if you learn to manage jump clones effectively, it will make your whole EVE experience quite a bit less frustrating and a lot more efficient. Now, the skills involved. So firstly, as I mentioned before, there's infomorph psychology. Which will allow 1 jump clone per level. However, if you're finding yourself wanting more jump clones, then there's also the secondary skill, Advanced Infomorph Psychology. Which will allow you another jump clone per level. Now, as I mentioned before, there is a 24-hour cooldown when jumping between corporations. This can be reduced by infomorph synchronization, if memory. However, there is no secondary skill to infomorph synchronization, so you're stuck with a maximum of a 5-hour reduction there. The idea behind this being that if the cooldown is 24 hours just straight up, then unless you jump at the same time every day, you'll slowly get out of sync with your jump clone requirements. So it's a good idea to have at least a couple of levels of infomorph synchronizing trained, just to give yourself a little bit of breathing room. It's worth noting that jump clones can only be created from NPC corporations, so you cannot create them at player-owned stations. Now, as I mentioned earlier, EVE University has jump clone standings in 2 corporations. These being the Wycomi Peace Corps and also Canada Innovations. Worth noting that this is not the overreaching version of Canada Innovations, which is Canada Kingdom, and also not Canada Innovation, which is a different corporation. So we've got a question. As clones can only be created in NPC structure, that means one must fly a clone to a Rorqual or pos and then jump out. Yes, that's correct. So while ships such as the Rorqual can fit a clone that way, you'll first need to actually fly out and put a clone there. So the next question, can you create more than one jump clone in the same station? Not at the same time. So while you can create multiple jump clones from the same station, you'll first have to move the existing jump clone out of the way. You can think of it this way. So a station has 3 slots for clones. Your current clone, your medical clone, and your jump clone. We'll cover exactly how not to screw that up in a bit, but it is important to remember. It's worth noting that if you accidentally talk, don't talk to the agents from the 2 corporations that we have standings with. And if you do, then you will unfortunately create your own standings with them and be forced to leave the uni. Because if you don't, then we lose access to those jump clone standings, because corporation standings are based on the average of all the members in the corporation with standings towards a particular group. However, if you screw up with the Wycomi Peace Corps, there are multiple people in the uni that may be able to bump you up to quick level 4 missions, such as myself and quite a few people if you go to the corporation tab and look at the standings breakdown. We'll cover that at the end if required though. Now, unlike medical clones that you can move around, like I did mention, there is Canada Innovation and Canada Innovations. I appear to have linked the wrong one. Yeah, I have. Apologies for that. Looks like I've got it written down wrong in my notes. Thanks for the heads up. Anyway, so unlike medical clones, jump clones, you do actually have to go to the station to create them and then move them around manually. So you can't just move your jump clone with an easy drop-down box. And if you're actually grinding the standings yourself, make sure that you do grind with a corporation that does have medical bay facilities, because otherwise you still won't be able to create them no matter what you're standing. Now, so we'll go through, in a sec, we'll go through all the sort of downsides of jump clones and how to avoid some of those. Does anyone have any questions before we continue? This is going quite fast. Okay, so since there's no questions, we'll go on to some of the downsides. Now, as I've mentioned, you can only jump once every 24 hours, so make sure that you do train infomorph synchronizing. And while this will reduce your skills a bit, this will reduce time down a bit. If you jump into a clone and later realize that you do need to get back, it may be quite difficult, so do keep that in mind, that you won't be able to get back for major engagements, that sort of thing, at the earliest possible notice. It's also possible to actually destroy a jump clone, including implants, so we'll go over how that works. So as I mentioned, think of it this way. A station has three sections for clones: the active clone, the medical clone, and the jump clone. So if you're in a station, you can have your medical clone in that station and also a jump clone in that station, because they occupy different areas. However, if you try to create a jump clone in a station that already has a jump clone, then the old jump clone would have to be removed, and Eve will warn you about that. But if you just randomly click yes on prompts like I do occasionally, then you will destroy a clone with lots of lovely implants in it. There's actually a conveniently drawn comic for this that illustrates this, which has been linked in the channel, which it really just iterates everything that I've said regarding sections. That's actually pretty much all there is for jump clones. Overall, they are pretty simple. Once you actually get your head around how they work and how to actually transport them. So does anyone have any questions about jump clones in general and that sort of thing before we actually continue discussing things? I'm going to hope that means that I've covered the material and not that you've fallen asleep. Okay, so question. Permission to redescribe how to lose a jump clone in a station. So you can only have one jump clone in a station at the same time. If you try to create a jump clone in that station, it won't let you. However, since when you jump out of a clone, you leave a jump clone behind, if you try to jump out of a station where you already have a jump clone stored, when the game tries to store the jump clone that you're about to create by jumping away, then it will have to destroy one of them. So don't jump clone away from a station where you've already got a jump clone stored. Apologies for not mentioning that before. Earlier you mentioned some implants grant bonuses across all clones. Could you link one of those implants? There's actually only one implant, and if someone could remember the name, that would be wonderful. What it does is grants you a gold-coloured pod instead of a green one. It doesn't actually provide any functional bonus. memory serves, we've got actually, as you can see, it takes up slot 79, so it doesn't actually replace any other things, so you can just sort of you can just sort of implant it whenever you want. There's a few people in Eve University that actually have these implants, such as, I believe, Titus, our teaching manager. So, how do players create jump clones on their own without NPC stations like the Rorqual mentioned earlier? Okay, so NPC stations aren't Rorquals. Rorqual is a capital industrial ship that is used for mining and can fit a clone vat bay. Stations are anything that's owned by non-actual players, so things owned by the system. Now, anywhere that you can actually put your medical clone has medical facilities, and you can create a jump clone at any station that has a medical facility, provided that you have the standings required. So the conventional way, if you don't want to join a corp that already has that standing, is to grind up the standing with a corp that has medical facilities. Now, is there a better way to create a jump clone other than the method drawn out on the E-UNI wiki? Could you clarify as to which method that is? And it's worth noting that Estel Arador provides jump clones for free, but there's also the actual Eve fee of creating them of 100,000 ISK. Okay, so the procedure for people already in the uni. Now, if you don't mind leaving the uni and going through the join process, you could leave and join Estel Arador. But if you don't want to leave, then yes, that is the easiest way. And we'll actually be flying up to one of those stations today, so that anyone that would like to can create jump clones there. Will also be a good chance for to practice some actual fleet things and just a general introduction to travel fleets. What are the best corps to grind for jump clone access? Okay, so there's actually not really much of a requirement after having a medical clone or medical facility, because once you've created the jump clone, you can move it anywhere, so location isn't a long-term consideration. So if you're doing level 4 missions for a corporation already, you may as well just continue with that, assuming that they do have at least one medical facility, preferably in HiSec. Any other questions or clarifications on my answers so far? And yes, there are a lot of war targets about. So another question, does each jump clone have its own medical clone, or do all clones reincarnate in the same place when you're potted? Okay, so you have one medical clone per character. So whenever you die, you'll go back to that one same medical clone. And yes, as Ella mentioned, not all NPC corporations have medical facilities. And as Yana mentions, yes, you can specify which system has your medical clone, and you can move that around anytime, and it's easy and cheap. It's just a drop-down box. This allows you to do something cool called the Pod Express, where if you don't have any expensive implants in your current clone, you can set your medical clone to somewhere where you want to transport instantly to, and then kill yourself. And you will wake up in your desired location. Okay, so question, Pod Express. As I mentioned, set your medical clone somewhere where you want to be and then kill yourself, and you'll wake up in your desired location. Though remember that you'll lose any implants, so that's not a good idea. However, actually extends to something else. If you would like to change, like just get rid of your clones, instead of just destroying them, if you want to get rid of all of them, what you can do... Actually, can you still share your clone? Your pod? I don't think you can. Never mind. Okay, so could you discuss jump clone strategy for a bit? I'm always waiting on the timer someplace where I don't want to be. So, as I've said, do train infomorph synchronizing. I have it to, I think, level 4, so that gives me a 20-hour, an extra 4 hours of breathing room. So what I tend to do is keep different clones with different sets of training inputs. So for example, if I'm training leadership skills, then I will have a clone with charisma and willpower learning implants, and only those two, which means you can still have +4 or +5 implants in a PvP clone without it being that expensive. And then there's also one clone that actually just sits in a station which has just all +5s when I'm training just random stuff. But apart from that, really the only thing you can do is be mindful of the fact that there is a cooldown. So try to do everything you need to in one location that day. So for example, if you're doing trade, try to do all your trade and PvP and things in that one area of space and then jump the next day instead of jumping around a lot. Though you can always, if need be, fly manually, and jumping in a shuttle will get you to most places pretty quickly. Though if you do know that you're going to have a fleet in a couple of days, I find it easier to actually write that down so that you make sure that you're not in your full +5 clone at the time. So we've got another question. So the medical clone location that is selected is the location that I wake up in when I get podded, regardless of where I am in space. Yep. So wherever your medical clone is, that's where you wake up when you die. It's worth noting that with the use of the pod saver tab, you shouldn't really be losing your pod in high sec or low sec because there's no bubbles and it's fairly to get out. So what you do there is when you know you're going to explode, you switch to your pod saver tab, except for lag. So you switch to your pod saver tab, pick something on that list, which is just a list of things you can warp to in the system, and you start mashing the warp button. If you want to do things a bit differently, you can also eject from your ship beforehand, though that will occasionally leave it in the war target's hands if they react quickly enough and stop shooting. Had that happen a couple of times. Not with war targets, but just with random PvP things where they'll just eject and get out. Though remember that when you die, there's something called a session change, which means for a bit you'll have difficulty actually jumping between systems. So when you do get your ship exploded and you're just in your pod, jump around in the same system for a while. So another question, can we reduce the cooldown time between jump clones? Yep, and that's using the skill infomorph synchronizing, and it reduces it by 1 hour for every level. There's no secondary advanced synchronizing skill, so you're stuck to a maximum of 5-hour reduction to 19 hours. And yeah, if you'd like to look where your medical clone is and you're not in a medical facility, you can do so by looking at your home system on your character sheet. Now, if you would like to change your medical clone location, what you do is go to a station that has a clone bay, such as Aldrat, Pata Tech School. You click on the icon with the big red plus and go to change station. Now, you'll see two sections, stations with medical facilities and stations without medical facilities. So stations with medical facilities are places where you can put your clone, such as Stackmon, Aldrat, the Nullsec campus, that sort of thing, and stations where you can't will be places like the Low-Sec campus and the High-Sec group, because those stations do not have medical facilities. So while you will be able to leave a jump clone there, you will not be able to leave your medical clone there. And to reiterate, make sure that your medical clone keeps more skill points than whatever you currently have. Because it really sucks when you wake up and realize that you've lost something. This is a pretty short list. Is it only places you've been or something? No, it looks like it's actually corporation offices. Though I have a feeling there's more than that. So if someone would like to chime in with if anyone knows what the additions are. That being said, it does seem to include all the stations that E-UNI does have corporation offices at. Probably something to do with the actual region you're in as well. Though that's just a wild stab in the dark. So question, is there a bug with jump clones on the character sheet that doesn't show how many implants your clones have? Not that I'm aware of, and looking at my own jump clones, it's showing the implants correctly. However, I only tend to keep learning implants in my clones. So it may be different if you have other implants. So slots that aren't 1 through 5. I wonder if I should buy that gold implant. Anyway, so as I mentioned, Eve University does have stations where we can create jump clones, and now's the part where we'll start actually heading to one of those places. I see what you mean, Clint. I haven't experienced that bug. And yes, we will be moving to the uni-only mumble, since this is only applicable to people that are currently in Eve University. So, if you are not a member of Eve University, thank you for attending the class. If you have any questions, you're welcome to contact me privately, or you can post in our thread, in the class thread, if you haven't already, or if you haven't seen it already. This class will be run again at 1400, and keep an eye out next week for Introduction to E-University.